Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for coming. It's good to see on Ash Wednesday people haven't gone off poetry for Lent. That may happen afterwards, no? See. I thought I would read some new stuff and some not so old stuff, but stuff that's had an outing before, for sure. And the first thing I'll read will be the first little poem in a book that'll come out later in the year, probably September, October time. And I read it because it came very quickly to me, and it's the way poems tend to come, I think, to poets. Suddenly, and if you're lucky, joyfully, and then it's over. And but never quite. If you're successful, the poem doesn't slip back into the ordinary. Something of the surprise and gift of the thing stays. So this, on the first day of Lent, is really slightly more appropriate to way at the end of the Trinity season, because it invokes a mighty wind. It's Pentecostal. It's one of the great images for inspiration, whether you're Rilke or an apostle in the upper room, or in this case, somebody waking you up in the middle of the night, myself. Little short thing. And it's one of those poems where the title is the first line. Had I not been awake. Had I not been awake, I would have missed it. A wind that rose and whirled until the roof pattered with quick leaves off the sycamore and got me up, the whole of me a patter, alive and ticking like an electric fence. Had I not been awake, I would have missed it. It came and went so unexpectedly, and almost it seemed dangerously, returning like an animal to the house, a courier blast that there and then lapsed, but never after into the ordinary. Another windy poem that I quite often read when Liam O'Flynn and myself have done concerts with music and poems. Liam has this very famous tune called Port na Bookie, which is the music that came in on the storm wind to a fiddler on the Blasket Islands. That is the myth, the origin story of this tune. So we don't have Port na Bookie today, but again, it's a Pentecostal wind that brings in gift that the story represents, called the Given Note. On the most westerly Blasket, in a dry stone hut, he got this air out of the night. Strange noises were heard by others who followed, bits of a tune coming in on loud weather, though nothing like melody. He blamed their fingers and ear as unpracticed, their fiddling easy, for he had gone alone into the island and brought back the whole thing. The house throbbed like his full violin. So whether he calls it spirit music or not, I don't care. He took it out of wind off mid-Atlantic. Still he maintains from nowhere. It comes off the bow gravely, rephrases itself into the air. He blamed their fingers and ear as unpracticed. It's one of the other sides of artistic game, calling, whatever. You must be ready for surprise, but you must have the capacity to hold it when it arrives, to stop it. So this poem is about fingers that are practiced. I never thought of my father as an artist until I remembered he made these harvest bows in the harvest time. Plaited wheat straw usually into this beautiful little plaited string, and then looped it into a bow. And he would wear it, as many people did around that time in that place, on the lapel in the harvest time. And in my 30s, I thought this is very beautiful, and I asked him to make me one. And I wore it a couple of times into Dublin, and I thought, no, you can't do that. this is playing the rural card too heavily, you know. But really very beautiful stuff. Anyway, this is called the Harvest Bow, and it's different kind of poem, more deliberate, and about a different kind of working, really. He also, in his time, was an artist with game cocks, kind of highly illegal business in his time. Up around the border, there used to be the mains and so on, so that's referred to also. The Harvest Bow. As you plaited the harvest bow, you implicated the mellowed silence in you, in wheat that does not rust, but brightens as it tightens twist by twist into a knowable corona, a throwaway love knot of straw. Hands that aged round ash plants and cane sticks, and lapped the spurs in a lifetime of game cocks, hark to their gift and worked with fine intent until your fingers moved somnambulant. I tell and finger it like braille, gleaning the unsaid off the palpable. And if I spy into our golden loops, if I spy into its golden loops, I see us walk between the railway slopes into an evening of long grass and midges, blue smoke straight up, old beds and ploughs and hedges, an auction notice on an outhouse wall, you with the harvest bow in your lapel, me with the fishing rod, already homesick for the big lift of these evenings, as your stick, whacking the tips off weeds and bushes, beats out of time, and beats, but flushes nothing. That original town land, still tongue-tied as the straw tied by your hand. The end of art is peace, could be the motto of this frail device, that I have pinned up on our deal dresser, like a drawn snare, slipped lately by the spirit of the corn, yet burnished by its passage, and still warm. These harvest bows I learned afterwards were probably some kind of vestigial trace of what they call in England the corn dollies, which in their turn the anthropologists think are some kind of vestigial trace of some Indo-European fertility business involving the spirit of the corn, like Cailleach and so on. So there's that. The other night, last night I was at Tom Kilroy's play. I think it's called Christ Save Us. I can't remember, or Christ Take Care of Us. But it's a version of a play called Spring Awakening by a German poet, playwright Wiedekind. And it's all about boarding school and sexuality awakening and all the troubles and pleasures that come from that, and dangers indeed. So there was that, and then the previous Tuesday there was a TV program called The Boys of St. Columns, which was about boarding school. And again, there wasn't just as much sex in it, but it was sort of a hovering unspoken. So I will read a couple of poems that somehow relate to that. This one is called, the first one is called The Conway Stewart. My first real fountain pen I got my first day at boarding school, when I was separating from the mother and father, and neighbour drove me to Derry, and then we went to Buncrana for the day, and I got a Conway Stewart fountain pen. And that was the beginning of one thing and the end of another. They went off home, I was in college. So this is a little short thing called The Conway Stewart. And then the second, the one I read after that is also kind of a new thing. It's called Uncoupled, and it's about the pair of them separately, just put together, not a couple. The Conway Stewart. There may be people here who never saw a fountain pen. More anthropology called for here. Meet the Conway Stewart. Medium, 14 carat nib. 3 gold bands in the clip-on screw top. in the mottled barrel a spatulate thin pump-action lever the shopkeeper demonstrated, the nib uncapped, treating it to its first deep snorkel in a newly opened ink bottle, guttery, snottery, letting it rest then at an angle to ingest, giving us time to look together and away from our parting due that evening to my long hand, dear to them next day. Uncoupled. Who is this coming to the ash pit, walking tall as in a procession, bearing in front of her a slender pan withdrawn just now from underneath the firebox, weighty, full to the brim with whitish dust and flakes and sparking hot, so that the wind is blowing them into her apron bib, into her mouth and eyes, while she proceeds unwavering, her burden held out horizontal still, both hands gripping tight the metal knob, proceeds until we have lost sight of her, where the worn path turns behind the hen house. Who is this, not much higher than the cattle, working his way towards me through the pen, his ash plant in one hand, lifted and pointing, a stick of keel in the other, calling to where I'm perched on top of a shaky gate, waving and calling something I cannot hear, with all the lowing and roaring, lorries revving at the far end of the yard, the dealers shouting among themselves, and now to him, so that his eyes have left mine, and I know the pain of loss before I know the term. This is called the butts, cigarette butts. Forbidden fruit. His suits hung in the wardrobe, broad and short and slightly bandy-sleeved, flattened back against themselves, a bit standoffish. Stale smoke and oxter sweat came at you in a stirred-up brew when you reached in. A whole rake of thornproof and blue serge swung heavily, like waterweed disturbed. I sniffed tonic unfreshness, then delved past flap and lining for the forbidden fistfuls. But a kind of empty-handedness transpired. Out of soot cloth pressed against my face, out of those layered stuffs that surged and gave, out of the cold, smooth pocket lining, nothing but chaff cocoons, a paperiness, not known again until the last days came. And we must learn to reach well in beneath each meagre armpit, to lift and sponge him, one on either side, feeling his lightness, having to dab and work closer than anybody liked, but having, for all that, to keep working. I thought for a while in last days of August in 2006, I was going to be uncoupled myself. I had a little turn, as they say, small stroke, luckily got over thanks to help of friends and other things. They were there to assist in all kinds of ways. And went in ambulance to hospital in Donegal. We were at a party, a birthday party on the Saturday night. This happened the Sunday morning. So we were on this journey through Donegal, strange, myself paralysed on one side, and great intensity. And afterwards, I wrote 3 little sections, a little triptych poem. And what set it off was remembering John Donne's poem called The Ecstasy. It's very beautiful. It's a love poem with the Renaissance poet writing about the two lovers lying all day still on a bank beside each other, and their bodies are there, but their souls in this are up out of their bodies. Their souls are separate, and they are conversing above them. And of course, then being done and being Renaissance Pope said, well, that's all very well, souls are great, but at the same time, you know, bodies are useful too. So actually, the two stanzas at the beginning of the ecstasy, very beautiful. It said, our hands were firmly cemented with a fast band, which thence did spring. Our eye beams twisted, and did thread our eyes upon one double string. As twixt equal armies, fate suspends unequal victory. Our souls, which to advance their state are gone forth, hung twixt her and me. And at the end he says, having granted that the souls were great, to our bodies turn we, then, that so weak men on love revealed may look. Love's mysteries in souls do grow, but yet the body is his book. So this is called Chanson d'aventure. That's a kind of literary form which we know better as ballads, which begin as I roved out, something happened. So Chanson d'aventure, three little things in that context. To our bodies turn we. So I beg your pardon, even shorter. Love's mysteries in souls do grow, but yet the body is his book. It comes on after the ambulance on to pulling the bell in St. Colum's College, back to St. Colum's. We used to get a job to ring the bell when we were seniors. And then to a corridor where I'm straight up doing my physio, like a famous artwork from Delphi. Chanson d'aventure. Strapped on, wheeled out, fork lifted, locked in position for the drive, bone shaken, bumped at speed, the nurse a passenger in front, you ensconced in her vacated corner seat, me flat on my back. Our postures all that journey still the same, everything and nothing spoken. Our eye-beams threaded laser fast. No transport ever like it until then, in the sunlit cold of a Sunday morning ambulance, when we might, oh my love, have quoted Donne, on love on hold, body and soul apart. Apart. The very word is like a bell that the sexton Malachi Boyle outrolled in illo tempore in Balachi. Or the one I told in Derry in my turn as college bellman, the hall of it there still, in the heel of my once capable warm hand that I could not feel you lift and lay in yours throughout that journey, when it lay flop heavy as a bell pull, and we careered at speed through Dunglow, Glendone, our gaze ecstatic and bisected by a hooked up drip feed to the cannula. Lucky to get that treatment in time. The charioteer at Delphi holds his own, his 6 horses and chariot gone, his left hand lopped from a wrist protruding like an open spout, bronze reins astream in his right, his gaze ahead, empty as the space where the team should be, his eyes front, straight back posture like my own, doing physio in the corridor, holding up as if once more I'd found myself in step between 2 shafts, another's hand on mine, each slither of the share, each stone it hit, registered like a pulse in the timbered grips. Everything ends up in a little sensation, remembered for roughly 66 years. Miracle. This is from the biblical New Testament story of Christ being crowded by the people wanting to heal, the big crowd, and the man who is sick of the palsy is carried into the door, and then they find they can't get near the Christ. So they take him to the roof, open the tiles and let him down into the thing. And what I realized after my experience, of course, the miracle and beauty of Christ's healing is the central story, but there's another miraculous and essential part in it, and that is the friendship of the people who bear him to his healing. Miracle. Little short thing anyway. Not the one who takes up his bed and walks, but the ones who have known him all along and carry him in. Their shoulders numb, they ache and stoop deep locked in their backs, the stretcher handles slippery with sweat. And no let up until he's strapped on tight, made tiltable, and raised to the tiled roof, then lowered for healing. Be mindful of them as they stand and wait for the burn of the paid-out ropes to cool, their slight lightheadedness and incredulity to pass, those ones who have known him all along. This happens to be a month of an anniversary of in 1953, I lost a young brother on the road, and I wrote a poem, 1963, one of the very first poems I wrote called Midterm Break. It has had great currency. Joan Hume read it on the St. Boys and St. Collins program, so I thought, all right, do it again. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbours drove me home. In the porch I met my father, crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride. And Big Jim Evans, saying it was a hard blow. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in. And I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Whispers informed strangers I was the eldest away at school, as my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. At 10 o'clock, the ambulance arrived with the corpse, stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Next morning, I went up into the room. Snowdrops and candles soothed the bedside. I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks, paler now, wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple. He lay in the 4-foot box as in his cot. No gaudy scars. The bumper knocked him clear. A 4-foot box, a foot for every year. Because I will link into another poem I'm going to read later. I read it for that reason, but also I want to read yet another linker later on. You won't be here all day. Later on doesn't cover too long. This is called A Kite for Michael and Christopher. And I liked it when I wrote it first very much. I still like it, but it's kind of I knew at the time it was a kind of almost dangerous poem to write because it prepares them for grief, and that's one of the things that I suppose young people should be prepared for. But if you say it out and you have any sort of superstition in you, you think you might be bringing it on. So far so good anyway. But it's called A Kite for Michael and Christopher, two boys. I did another little present poem for my daughter Catherine, which was called A Hazel Stick for Catherine Ann. And at the time Derek Mahan was a poetry editor of the New Statesman. He wrote to me and said, have you any poem I could print in the New Statesman? So I sent him A Hazel Stick for Catherine Ann, and he wrote back and said, a bit strict, isn't it? So, so the columns comes up again. That was a strap. Anyway, a kite for Michael and Christopher. Of course, everything went back to my childhood. I mean, my father was not a man to flaunt himself in play. One extraordinary time I remember was when he was out on a Sunday afternoon flying a kite with us. Kind of historic moment. All through that Sunday afternoon, a kite flew above Sunday. A tightened drumhead, an armful of blown chaff. I'd seen it grey and slippy in the making. I'd tapped it when it dried out white and stiff. I tied the boat of newspapers along its 6-foot tail. But now it was far up, like a small black lark. And now it dragged, as if the bellied string were a wet rope hauled upon to lift a shoal. My friend says that the human soul is about the weight of a snipe. Yet the soul at anchor there, the string that sags and ascends, weighs like a furrow assumed into the heavens. Before the kite plunges down into the wood, and this line goes useless, take it in your 2 hands, boys, and feel the strumming, rooted, long-tailed pool of grief. You were born fit for it. Stand in here in front of me and take the strain. Strict tune, I'm afraid. These are 2 poems from a sequence of poems I wrote after my mother died, and I've read them before for sure, but they're the ones they're not new ones. From clearances. When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one, like solder weeping off the soldering iron. Cold comfort set between us, things to share gleaming in a bucket of clean water, and again let fall, little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So when the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs the prayers for the dying, and some were responding and some crying, I remembered her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. This is about folding sheets. I suppose somebody who hasn't seen it hasn't actually ever folded sheets either, but it's a dying art, I suppose. The cool that came off sheets just off the line made me think the damp must still be in them. But when I took my corners of the linen and pulled against her, first straight down the hem and then diagonally, then flapped and shook the fabric like a sail in a cross wind, they made it dried out, undulating thwack. So we'd stretch and fold and end up hand to hand for a split second, as if nothing had happened. For nothing had that had not always happened beforehand, day by day, just touch and go, coming close again by holding back in moves where I was X and she was O, inscribed in sheets, sheets sewn from ripped out flour sacks. This is another one that's fairly well known. But maybe since we're in the gallery, I'll read a couple of poems that are wanting to be pictures. Again, I think the first one is called Mossbawn Sunlight. It really wants to be a Vermeer. And the second one is called The Seed Cutters. And it really is a Bruegel that hasn't been painted yet. But they seem to me pictorial and quiet and right for this lovely mood here. So, the first The two poems are dedicated to my Aunt Mary, who died in 1980. These they came out in 1975. She baked the bread in the house, and she was also a woman who worked about the farm quite a bit. She would have been among the seed cutters, cutting potatoes seed outside. She was a kind of genius of the, it's a kind of St. Bridget figure, really, the outside world, not the inside house, but the outside house, milking and cutting seed, and also baking bread, as a matter of fact. That's another matter. So two poems of dedication, Mossbawn, Sunlight. There was a sunlit absence. The helmeted pump in the yard heated its iron. Water honeyed in the slung bucket, and the sun stood like a griddle cooling against the wall of each long afternoon. So her hands scuffled over the bakeboard. The reddening stove sent a plaque of heat against her, where she stood in a flowery apron by the window. Now she dusts the board with a goose's wing. Now sits, broad-lapped, with whitened nails and measling shins. Here is a space again, the scone rising to the tick of 2 clocks. And here is love, like a tinsmith scoop, sunk past its gleam in the meal bin. The seed cutters. They seem hundreds of years away. Bruegel, you'll know them if I can get them true. They kneel under the hedge in a half circle. Behind a windbreak, wind is breaking through. They are the seed cutters. The tuck and frill of leaf sprout is on the seed potatoes buried under that straw. With time to kill, they are taking their time. Each sharp knife goes, lazily halving each root that falls apart in the palm of the hand. A milky gleam, and at the centre, a dark watermark. Oh, calendar customs. Under the broom, yellowing over them, compose the frieze, with all of us there, our anonymities. St. Kevin and the Blackbird. And then there was St. Kevin and the Blackbird. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. And then there was St. Kevin and the Blackbird. The saint is kneeling, arms stretched out, inside his cell. But the cell is narrow, so one turned up palm is out the window, stiff as a crossbeam, when a blackbird lands and lays in it and settles down to nest. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life, is moved to pity. Now he must hold his hand like a branch out in the sun and rain for weeks, until the young are hatched and fledged and flown. And since the whole thing's imagined anyhow, imagine being Kevin. Which is he? Self-forgetful, or in agony all the time, from the neck all out down through his hurting forearms? Are his fingers sleeping? Does he still feel his knees? Or has the shut-eyed blank of under-earth crept up through him? Is there distance in his head? Alone and mirrored clear in love's deep river, to labour and not to seek reward, he prays. A prayer his body makes entirely, for he has forgotten self, forgotten bird, and on the river bank, forgotten the river's name. I was going to read 3 more. We have about, stop with 5 or 10 too, I think. Well, these are the last poems in different books, so there are 3 conclusions. And one of them, it could be called as a kind of pastiche of a very famous poem and book by W.B. Yeats. This could be called The Wild Swans in Clare, instead of The Wild Swans at Cool. It's about a place called the Flaggy Shore, where, again, to go back to that wind that blew, the surprise. We went for a trip to the west with Brian Freeland, his wife Mary, and myself, and there's this terrific sense of just revelation, sudden wind and revelation of energy and beauty and wildness along this strand. And so wrote this quite quickly, again with a surprise in it, as a kind of postscript to that journey, and it's called Postscript. The late Sean McRaven once came to Belfast, many times he came to Belfast, but this time he came in the late 60s to do something on the Belfast Festival. And as ever, Sean tended to do his recordings for RTE quite late in the day, and we did them in the club bar, or the Crown Bar opposite the station. And he was heading away quickly with his recording, and he said, "We said, we want to listen to this, Sean. What are you going to call it, this program?" He said, "I'm going to call it the Belfast Festival 1968. And I said, "Oh, well, I will listen to that." And then he said, "I could never resist this Rococo thing in myself," he said. So, Postscript is a kind of a Rococo title, I don't think. And sometime make the time to drive out west into County Clare, along the Flaggy Shore, in September or October, when the wind and the light are working off each other, so that the ocean on one side is wild with foam and glitter, and inland among stones, the surface of a slate-grey lake is lit by the earth lightning of a flock of swans, their feathers ruffed and ruffling, white on white, their fully grown, headstrong-looking heads tucked or cresting or busy underwater. Useless to think you'll park and capture it more thoroughly. You're neither here nor there. A hurry through which known and strange things pass, as big soft buffetings come with the car sideways and catch the heart off guard and blow it open. The next poem goes back to midterm break, and before that, just after that accident, our old neighbour of ours, a very superstitious old lady called Annie Devlin, she still realised, she read the world in terms of science, she had a magical sense of the world, and she said to my mother, "You know, was a bird on the shed roof, the byre roof?" She said, I never liked it. And this was a kind of sign that something was going to happen for her, and after the accident it was fulfilled for her. So that's referred to in the poem, and the accident is going back to. And lines that were in a translation of Sophocles, Antigone. Oh no, I beg your pardon, it wasn't. It was Philoctetes, the curate Troy. They are quoted in this. It sounds quite a gloomy poem, but if a thing's well enough made, it shouldn't be that gloomy. The Blackbird of Glanmore. On the grass when I arrive, filling the stillness with life, but ready to scare off at the very first wrong move. In the ivy when I leave, it's you, blackbird, I love. I park, pause, take heed, breathe. Just breathe and sit. And lines I once translated come back. I want away to the house of death, to my father under the low clay roof. And I think of one gone to him, a little stillness dancer, haunter son, lost brother, cavorting through the yard, so glad to see me home, my homesick first term over. And think of a neighbour's words long after the accident. Yon bird on the shed roof, up on the ridge for weeks. I said nothing at the time, but I never liked yon bird. The automatic lock clunked shut. The blackbird's panic is short-lived. For a second, I've a bird's eye view of myself, a shadow on raked gravel in front of my house of life. Hedgehog, I am absolute for you, your ready talk-back, your each standoffish comeback, your piggy, nervy goldbeak, on the grass when I arrive, in the ivy when I leave. And I'd like to leave this wonderful, thank you, terrifically attentive audience with another little kite. It'll be the last poem in this new book. It begins with a big wind blowing, and it ends with a different wind. In the middle of the book, there's a sequence of poems dedicated to my first grandchild, her first grandchild, who came along in 2006. And then early 2008, another one came along. I had a problem. So this is called A Kite for Evie. And I, in the meantime, had translated an Italian poem called L'Aquilone, a kite by a 19th century Italian poet called Giovanni Pascoli. So this uses Pascoli's poem to salute the windfall of the second grandchild. A Kite for Evie. Air from another life and time and place. I should say, of course, one of those guys is the daddy, the other kite kids. Michael is the father of Evie, so this is the second kite. A Kite for Evie. Air from another life and time and place. Pale blue heavenly air is supporting a white wing beating high against the breeze. And yes, it is a kite. As when one afternoon all of us there trooped out among the briar hedges and stripped thorn, I take my stand again, halt opposite Anahorish Hill to scan the blue, back in that field to launch our long-tailed comet. And now it hovers, tugs, veers, dives askew, lifts again, goes with the wind until it rises to loud cheers from us below. Rises, and my hand is like a spindle unspooling, the kite a thin-stemmed flower, climbing and carrying farther, higher, the longing in the breast and planted feet and gazing face and heart of the kite flyer. Till spring breaks and, separate, elate, the kite takes off, itself alone, a windfall.